Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me for this two-part series where we will be looking at the findings from my text criticism on the Book of Jubilees. You might be asking yourself, why should I even care about this book? Well, this book is gaining in popularity. The popularity is more with the Hebrew roots leaning congregations, but there are other denominations that are taking notice. This book is also gaining in belief as well as its popularity. However, for some reason, people are forgetting to keep their guard up and they're forgetting to test or think critically while reading the Book of Jubilees. It is unwise and risky to read anything and blindly believe it, especially ones that have major issues and were not accepted into the biblical canon. It is understandable that not everyone has experience with investigating, researching, and doing text criticism on ancient books. With that being said, I have dug deep and applied text criticism analysis to the Book of Jubilees. It is important to note that I am not telling you what to believe. You have to figure that out for yourself, but you should at least consider, think about, and investigate the things that I have found. I hope you enjoy this video. All right, let's get started. The image on the left is the Ethiopian Book of Jubilees. It is written in Ge'ez, and this is one of the manuscripts that is a complete collection. The other manuscripts, such as the Aramaic version and the Hebrew version, are not whole manuscripts, but the Ethiopian one is. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. The manuscript on the right side is a piece of the Dead Sea Scrolls found at Qumran. That is the Book of Jubilees, written in Hebrew. And we'll show images throughout this presentation of those pieces from the Dead Sea Scrolls written in Hebrew. They will be in the top right corner of most of these slides so that you can kind of see for yourself real images. Now let's talk about our itinerary on this journey of analyzing the Book of Jubilees. First thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about truth and testing. Then we're going to learn the main points within the Book of Jubilees. We're going to ask ourselves, what is the Jubilees biblically speaking? We're going to get into talking about the canon and dating. We're going to talk about God's holy name. We're going to talk about the author, and we're going to talk about some of the characteristics of the author. And we're going to talk about contradictions to the Bible. And we're going to look at specific verses within the Book of Jubilees. And I should make this note that you don't have to be a person who has read this book to be able to watch this presentation. You can be completely ignorant of the Book of Jubilees. You will learn a lot about the Book of Jubilees because we are going to test it like the Bereans. Now we're going to talk about truth. Now this might come off as a very simple statement, but it's very important and it's good to think about. New information is not always true, just like different information is not always true. In reverse, new and different information is not always wrong. However, how do we know if something is true? We test it, we write it down, we remember, we compare, we ask questions. As followers of Yeshua, we cannot let our guard down because there will be false teachers, there'll be deception, fables, and bad doctrine, especially in the later days. We cannot leave one camp, i.e. mainstream Christianity, and swing hard to the opposing or opposite direction and accept the other side just because it is different. The Christians take away from God's law, and the Jewish or Jewish-like religions add to God's law. Both are playing religion. Religion is man's attempt at a relationship with God. Religion is man-made. We are to follow the truth and not religion. Truth is something that is correct and factual yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Truth holds up eternally. Now let's talk about testing and searching. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5:21. Prove all things, hold fast to that which is good. Acts 17 verse 11. These were more fair-minded than those in Thessalonica, that being the Bereans, here in this verse, in that they received the word with all readiness and searched the scriptures daily to find out whether these things were so. People, we need to be more like the Bereans, and we need to search out the scriptures. We need to know our scriptures and read our scriptures and use them to test all things. Now, I want to go over some of the tools that are used in text criticism. These are things to focus on when you're doing your researching and your testing and your filtering and your sifting and analyzing text, where things like cultural context, historical context, geographical context, linguistic context, that being Hebrew idioms and Greek idioms and sayings, the Bible as a whole, New Testament comparisons, authors writing, the entire book, paragraphs, sections, target text. Now, one of the big main warnings when reading the Book of Jubilees is one of the exact same main warnings that I would give to someone when reading the Book of Enoch, is you have to look at the translator. Now, if you go online and you look to see what is out there and what is the book that most people are buying, and they're buying the translation from a guy by the name of R.H. Charles. R.H. Charles is a early Christian philosopher from the 1800s, and he got his hands on the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch, and he made his own translation. The problem with these manuscripts is he alters the text. It is very clear that he changes the text to make it be what he wants it to be. And if you have time, go and check out my other text criticism on the Book of Enoch, in which I show you that R.H. Charles modifies the Book of Enoch not to say that Enoch is the Messiah, but rather opens it up to this person, this other person, one that we don't know yet, one that we don't have yet, is the Messiah. And that Enoch is seeing a vision describing this Messiah that is to come. So when he modifies the text, it makes it open for this to be talking about Jesus. However, the manuscripts don't say that. The manuscripts clearly state that Enoch, you are the Messiah. And that is a big problem when you want to believe this manuscript called the Book of Enoch, because that puts you at odds with what your Bible says. The Bible does not say Enoch is the Messiah. But with that being said, I would not recommend R.H. Charles for the Book of Jubilees, as he does the same thing. He makes changes to the text. And if you look carefully at your R.H. Charles versions, you should see some bold text. The bold text are the places that he modifies. However, not everything that he modifies did he make bold. So it is a very untrustworthy translation. A translation that I would recommend is by the man named James Vanderkam. He is one of the top experts on the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. He wrote this book here, and he did his own translation from the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Ethiopian text, and he compares them all. This is called the Jubilees, the Hermeneia translation, and I highly recommend it. This actually shows you the Dead Sea Scrolls in the text by underlining everything that has been found at Qumran. So if you are an avid believer or connoisseur of the Book of Jubilees, I would highly recommend that you get this version. Here is the website so that you can go look at the Dead Sea Scrolls version of the Book of Jubilees for yourself. And as you can see below, these are images of some of the pieces that we have left. This gives you an idea that there is not much left to the Book of Jubilees written in Hebrew from the Dead Sea Scrolls. A lot of people will say, well, the Book of Jubilees is in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yes, that might be true, but we are talking about tiny little fragments that shows up. So really, we don't have a complete full version outside the Ethiopian text, which is what everybody goes to. So to say that it hasn't changed over the years is a bold jump because we don't know that. All we can do is look at what we have, compare it. Now, with comparing it, I will say that what we have in the Ethiopian text that is also in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they seem to be almost the same. So for what it's worth, there hasn't been any changes, but we don't know that other parts have not been modified until we find more manuscripts. So perhaps we find more in some of the caves. Now, speaking of caves, me and my friend Lucas, he's a dear friend of mine who's really good with computers and softwares. He jumped on AI and helped me to generate a few of these pictures using AI generator. And this is a depiction of the Dead Sea Scrolls being hid away in jars in the caves at Qumran. You will see other AI images throughout this presentation. I just thought it'd be interesting and nice to look at. Now let's look at some of the main points in the Book of Jubilees. It's very important that we take the text to say what it says. Mechanically, if it says to be something, we need to accept it for that. We don't need to spiritualize and try to change the book. We need to accept the book for what it's saying it is and what it's doing. The book describes itself as divine revelation to Moses during his ascent up to the top of Mount Sinai. This being Mount Sinai prior to Moses visiting God at Mount Sinai and in a burning bush. God tells an angel to read aloud the heavenly tablets that contain things that will be revealed to Moses. The heavenly tablets are the backdrop of all the details and the commandments that are given, thus making this an authoritative source straight from heaven. The stories allegedly span 50 jubilees, with the conclusion of the last jubilee finishing with Israel entering into the land of Midian and going to Mount Sinai. The Book of Jubilees covers quickly stories found in Genesis and Exodus, those chapters being from Genesis chapter 1 to Exodus chapter 14. These quick snapshot stories often expanding the biblical accounts. Some main points of focus for the Book of Jubilees, the first being a focus on keeping the Sabbath and following the Jewish calendar of festivals and holidays. An emphasis on maintaining ritual purity and avoiding intermarriage. Elaborate angelology with angels playing a significant role. Interest in Enoch and events surrounding the Great Flood. Recounting Israel's early history and covenant relationship with God. Now let's talk about the word Jubilee and what does it actually translate to be. It comes from the Hebrew word yavel, which we translate as a ram or ram's horn. But this is not the best of translations. The most accurate core meaning of the word yavel is antelope horn. You can see this in the march around Jericho in Joshua chapter 6, verse 5. It says yavel. They were marching around Jericho, blasting the trumpet of the antelope horn. Now, we translate it as trumpet. Later in history, it becomes in the English meaning to celebrate. And that's because in the year of Jubilee, there's supposed to be blasting of trumpets and celebration because you've been forgiven for your debts. And you celebrate because you're happy. So that's why Jubilee has later become a meaning of being happy. But let's look at what the Bible says. Let's look distinctly at Leviticus chapter 25, verse 1. And it says, and this is God's holy name here, "And Jehovah spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, When you come into the land which I give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath to Jehovah." The land it's talking about there is the land of Israel, the promised land. And notice that they haven't made it to the promised land. When they were in the desert and the wilderness and the land of Midian and all the other places that they wandered, that was not their land. They were sojourners. They didn't own the land. But God was telling them that this thing called Jubilees, you will start that when you go into the land. So Jubilees is tied to the land of Israel. You cannot unhitch it. Let's go on to verse 8. "And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7, 7 years. And the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the day of atonement. You shall make the trumpet sound throughout all your land." So, you count 7 sevens, which is 49, and then the 50th year and the 49th year are Sabbaths. The 50th is the Jubilee year. So you basically have 2 land rest years in a row. And on the 50th one, you're supposed to be blasting the trumpet all the time. And you're supposed to do it specifically on the Day of Atonement. And all this is supposed to take place in the land of Israel. In the Book of Jubilees, it uses Jubilee cycle as a backdrop calendar to record significant events, having Jubilees start with Adam and go all the way through to Mount Sinai, where then God gives Moses the commandment of Jubilees and the land of Israel. That doesn't necessarily make sense that he would then tell them, this is how you do Jubilees, and it not resemble anything like what is being spoken prior to that. But we will get into that in a little bit. Now, one of the things that people will talk about when they talk about the Book of Jubilees, they will cite the Ethiopian canon. They'll say, well, the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees was in the Ethiopian canon. So it was established and it's been around for a very long time and people trusted it. However, let's look at what the details are about this Ethiopian canon. Here is a quote from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, produced by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church Synod in Addis Ababa in 1983 does not include Enoch and Jubilees in the list of the holy books of the Old Testament at all. It goes on to say, one can say that Enoch and Jubilees are in the canon, although we need to be careful in our use of the term canon. The concept of canon is not as rigid as in the West. You have various lists, and no one seems to be worried or to be preoccupied to have something definitive, and it is not considered inspired by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So there is no canonicity to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Ethiopian canon is not really a canon. There's no real canon established. It is what they called fluid. So it is a weak affair to say that it was in the canon, as there isn't really a canon. They accept many books at times, and they drop many books at times. Let's do some comparison here. And we have to talk about the Book of Enoch, as these books are anchored together. The Book of Jubilees is one solid book, one continuous flow of history. The Book of Enoch is a collection of books. Both of these books are dealing with questions and missing information that was not provided within the book of Genesis, that is, Bereshit in the Torah. Jubilees 7, verse 21, includes the names of giants that come from the Book of Dreams within Enoch, with the text dates to the 2nd century and a reference to a battle, that battle being the Battle of Bethshur. With this, it is dated to 164 BC. The Book of Jubilees author connects strongly to the astronomical book, the Book of the Watchers, and the Epistle of Enoch. All of these are what is commonly referred to as the Book of Enoch. The Jubilees author also hitches his ride and is either quotes or alludes to passages from Isaiah, Amos, and Psalms. This also adds further indication that the text was written after these books of the Tanakh were written. So what we're doing is we're pinning down when this book was authored. We will continue to do this with dating. Many of the scholars are dating the Book of Jubilees to 160 to 150 BC. This can be expanded a little bit, plus or minus 10 on each side, but there are a lot of reasons why they date to this time period. The Book of Jubilees is believed to be written in the 2nd century BC. The time frame is based on the language, phrases, unique words, cultural references, and Greek connections in history. The Book of Jubilees was written around 161 to 140 BC, and again, that can be plus or minus. It is believed to be originally written in Hebrew. The earliest fragments found are from the Dead Sea Scrolls collection at Qumran. Those fragments are dated to be 100 BC, physically. Due to the volume found, it is notable that the Book of Jubilees was important enough to be made into copies and put into circulation. However, the region of circulation seems to be more concentrated in the southern desert region outside of the land of Israel, which is prone to religious and desert sects. A lot of this concentrates in the land of Jordan. Now let's discuss some of the later references that are not mentioned in Jubilees. So these are flags that would indicate that the Book of Jubilees is only dated to the 2nd century BC and was not well known. The Septuagint, which can be dated to 285 to 247 BC, does not include the Book of Jubilees. The Samaritan Pentateuch, which can be dated around 122 BC, does not include the Book of Jubilees. Question: if Moses wrote the book, then why didn't it get added to the Torah? Why didn't the details, the special added details, get added into the books of Genesis through Exodus? Why not insert the sentences into the stories to enhance the story? There are no other sources prior to 160 BC mentioning the same added details that are found in the Book of Jubilees. There are no prophets when recounting the stories from Genesis detailing extra information that are found in the Book of Jubilees. Why is the information not being repeated? Because the Book of Jubilees is giving us all this extra new information about the stories found in the Bible. Why did they not get incorporated? Continuing on this vein of looking at later resources not mentioning Jubilees, there are no other cross-references of extra information pointed out of the Book of Jubilees within the Tanakh, that being the Old Testament. There are no examples of Yeshua, Jesus, quoting extra information pointed out from the Book of Jubilees. There are no disciples quoting extra information pointed out in the Book of Jubilees. There are no other cross-references of extra information pointed out in the Book of Jubilees within the Brit Hadashah, which is the New Testament. And my question at this point is, if this book was true to what it claims, that it was written by Moses at Mount Sinai, why do we not see anyone quoting unique details from it or referencing the book? Now let's talk about God's holy name. Many of these ancient manuscripts will either contain God's holy name on every page, or they will be lackluster and they will not hardly use it, or they will not use it at all. That is usually a sign, if a text is a religious holy text, as to whether or not it uses God's holy name. Now, there is an exception with the Book of Esther, but for the most part, if God's holy name is being used in the Old Testament, in these manuscripts, it is usually a good sign that the author is showing some reverence for these manuscripts. What do we find in the Book of Jubilees for the Tetragrammaton? That is the 4 letters of God's holy name. The Book of Jubilees does indeed appear to have, in the Hebrew fragments, God's holy name. And these are the places. We have it 5 times in the manuscripts. We have the prologue. We have chapter 1, verse 1. We have chapter 1, verse 2. We have chapter 21, verse 20. And we have chapter 25, verse 12. So it does contain God's holy name. However, it is very sparse, and it is only at the beginning and at the end of this book. That is very strange. Let's go further. With the exception of 5 times displaying God's holy name, the Book of Jubilees avoids it. It goes out of its way not to use God's name. When there are phrases in the Torah that use God's holy name, the Book of Jubilees fails to use them. An example, Jubilees chapter 13, verse 16, it says, "Called on the Lord's name, you, Lord, Most High God, are my God forever and ever." this would be a place where, in the Hebrew, if you're referencing God's holy name, you then end up using God's holy name. When God is talking, when people are praying, when people are calling out to God, when they're making oaths, making vows, and swearing in the Book of Jubilees, they do not use his holy name. This is uncharacteristic of the Hebrews in the ancient times. Chapter 6, verse 13, it says, "You shall fear only Jehovah," using God's holy name there, "your God, and you shall worship him and swear by his name." There is a commandment to swear by his name and to use his name when you do swear. You're not to swear any other way. You're not to make oaths in any other way. You are to use his holy name. So when this manuscript does not use his name, this is a marker. And in fact, it is a negative marker, because using God's holy name on every page is a marker for when Moses is writing. If you go back and look at the manuscripts and you look at the Hebrew, you will see Moses is using God's name all the time. It's crazy the amount he uses, and most of the stories are pointing back to God in some way or another. The Book of Jubilees does not do this. The Book of Jubilees is very unique and different. It's written in a different manner. It's using languages that date much later, uses words that date much later than what the manuscript is saying it is to be. It's saying that this is Moses writing at Mount Sinai. However, this doesn't look to be anything like Moses. It looks to be like a rabbi from the 2nd century BC. Now let's continue on to talk about the author more. The author has a strong stance on forbidding contact with Gentiles that exceeds that which is found in the Bible. There is a clear disdain with an agenda throughout the book. There is a strong case that the Jubilees author was reacting against perceived threats of assimilation from the dominant Hellenistic culture. Standing against nudity, that's Jubilees chapter 3 and chapter 7, where Jews historically were embracing nudity in the athletic games of the Greeks. This was a strong debated issue in its time, and that time period around 175 BC and newer. This helps us to date and figure out who the author is. Let's briefly look at what the early church fathers said about the Book of Jubilees. Many early church fathers, including Jerome, Rufinus, Epiphanius, and Augustine, considered the Book of Jubilees to be fraudulent. Some of them argued Jubilees was inspired by an evil spirit meant to deceive readers. It's also important to note that there were early church fathers who did consider the Book of Jubilees as authentic and okay to be put into a specified canon. However, later in history, many of them rejected it and they changed their mind. So you have people on both sides arguing for and against. The same goes for the Book of Enoch. There was for and against, but ultimately they landed in the spot as against being put into the canon. And I like to point out that God is sovereign. God would have control of what makes it in and what makes it out. So, however, man was involved, but you can't discount that God is on the throne and he could certainly control all of this. And it's interesting that the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch did not make it into our Bible canon. Now let's go on to learn further about the Book of Jubilees and some of the things that are being discussed in it that makes it unique and also puts it at odds with what is found in the Bible. Lot's descendants, those being Moab and Ammon. Jubilees 16, verse 9, all the descendants of Lot are destined for complete annihilation. Also, condemnation and forbiddance to marry. We know that Lot's descendants are Moab and the Ammonites. The destruction of Moab and Ammon contradicts Jeremiah chapter 48 and 49, and Isaiah chapter 15 and chapter 16, which talks about the restoration of a remnant of these people in the latter days. The Book of Jubilees has a problem here because it is saying that the descendants of Lot are destined to be destroyed and they'll be eternally wiped out and they're no good. However, in the Bible, Ruth was a Moabite. In the line of that is King David. And also the Messiah, Jesus, Yeshua, his line also contains a Moabite. So this stands at odds with the Bible. Something further that stands at odds with the Bible is fasting on the Sabbath. The Book of Jubilees, chapter 50, verse 12 and 13, fasting on the Sabbath is completely forbidden, and the punishment is death. Exodus 34, verse 28, Moses fasts 40 consecutive days. That would include the Sabbath. Matthew chapter 4, verse 2, Yeshua, Jesus, fasted 40 consecutive days. That would also include the Sabbath. This would be a violation of the commandment found in the Book of Jubilees. Punishment is death. This is a problem. The Book of Jubilees is standing at odds with the Bible. Also found in the Book of Jubilees, there is a strict forbiddance of observing the moon. Jubilees chapter 6, verse 36, there will be people who carefully observe the moon with the lunar observations because it is corrupt with respect to the seasons and is early from year to year by 10 days. Now he makes this claim that there will be people who observe the moon and those people are wrong and they'll be off by 10 days. This is not true. This is just what he's claiming. Therefore, years will come about for them when they will disturb the year and make a day of testimony something worthless and a profane day a festival. This contradicts the Bible. The Bible says to observe the new moons and to keep and guard the month of the Aviv. That is part of the calendar that is found in the Bible, the lunar harvest creator's calendar. It's a little hard to see in the English, the creator's calendar, because some of the King James has changed the words that would mean Aviv. They changed it to green ears and other words, talking about corn there. But there is a creator's calendar, and it is found in the Bible, and it is a lunar cycled calendar. And it auto-corrects every month. If you get off a day or two, within the next month, it will be auto-correct. So you can't get off. And it's also based on the harvest as well. And God is in control. Everything is pointing to God and the harvest. Continuing on about the calendar, Jubilees chapter 6, verse 28, on the first of the first month, the first of the fourth month, and the first of the seventh month, and the first of the 10th month are memorial days and days of seasons. They are written down and ordained at 4 divisions of years, as an eternal testimony. Each one of them consisting 13 weeks, their memorial extends from one to another, from the first to the second, from the second to the third, and from the third to the fourth. So it's essentially describing 4 divisions to the calendar that's being used in Jubilees. 4 divisions also was what they used in Babylon, and many of the cultures around there uptook that 4 divisions when they left Babylon. The Greeks also used the same structure as well, and the Egyptians had a 3-division year. So this is consistent what we find in the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, is there is Greek influence. Even the calendar that's being used, it's Greek influenced. And it makes sense because the land of Israel and all the surrounding areas throughout the Middle East at that time, they were conquered by the Greeks and then later conquered by the Romans, who also had the Greek culture. The Book of Jubilees follows a solar calendar that is 364 days per year rather than the lunar agricultural calendar found in the Bible. A positive point to what they state is they contradict the Hillel II Jewish calendar, which is not what is found in the Bible. The Hillel II Jewish calendar is something that is pre-calculated. That is the Jewish calendar that people will find today when they look up when feasts are. They will find that the internet or wherever their source is will say the Jewish calendar says that it's on this day. That's actually the Hillel II. The Hillel II calendar was pre-calculated by an astronomer that they went to and a mathematician that they went to in the land of Iraq, that being Babylon, later after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. You cannot pre-calculate the calendar of God. The Bible tells you how to do the calendar. When you pre-calculate it, you will be off. And essentially it's off. It's close, but it's off 3 out of the 4 years. Sometimes even a whole month off. And back onto the Jubilees calendar. According to the Jubilees calendar, it does not detail anything about recalibrating. And therefore, eventually, it will get earlier and earlier over the years. And within 30 years, it would move Sukkot, which is something that happens in the fall, the late fall, all the way to the springtime. So if you want to follow this calendar depicted in Jubilees, you have to modify it. You cannot use it the way it's being described because all the solar calendars get off. That is why you add a leap year. So the Jubilees calendar is not an effective or correct calendar. There has to be an outside piece of information to fix it. If you're going to try to be true to it, you cannot. Within 30 years, all of your feasts will be out of whack on a different date, not matching the Bible. Continuing on about the calendar, there is a clear agenda by the author to go against what is established and what is being done at the temple in its day, furthering our information of when this author was writing, showing that this author was writing in the 2nd century BC. He is against what the people are doing for the temple process. And it makes sense that if he is a desert sect living outside of the land of Israel, of course he's going to be against them. He doesn't want to be a part of what's going on at the temple in that day. The Book of Jubilees displays a pro-solar and anti-lunar harvest calendar that was used in its time. The Book of Jubilees, chapter 6, verse 36, there will be people who carefully observe the moon with the lunar observations because it is corrupt with respect to the seasons and its early year from year, year to year, 10 days, for they will err regarding months, Sabbaths, festivals, and the Jubilee. For this reason, I am commanding you and testifying to you, so that many testify to them, because after your death, your children will disturb it, so that they do not make the year consist of 364 days only. So he's saying that people who observe the new moon, or observe the moon in general for their calendar, are corrupt, and they'll be wrong. And we need to teach our children not to listen to those people and to pass it on, that they are to keep it as a 364-day calendar only. This puts those people at odds with what is being done at the temple. Furthering on, it speaks against the lunar observers, saying it gets off by 10 days, except the lunar calendar actually auto-corrects every month, and the solar calendar is the one that gets off. So you can see the author has reversed the talking points. He's saying that the solar calendar is the correct one and doesn't get off, essentially, and that the lunar agricultural calendar is the one that gets off. There is an agenda here, and he's actually wrong. This is pure propaganda. If it doesn't math, then it's not right. There's something wrong here. The author also compares the lunar observers to people who eat blood. So at the very end of him ranting about there are people who keep the calendar according to the moon and observe the moon, that these people are corrupt and they're wrong and they get off, and also they eat blood. This is propaganda. This is something you say to scare someone into being on your side. These are fear tactics. This is classic propaganda. So the author is very much displaying his agenda, and he's wrong. He's not matching what is said in the Bible. Let's address some main points with the Bible, New Testament, and Yeshua, and the issue of the calendar. Yeshua, that being Jesus, never once spoke against the calendar that was being used by the temple in his time. Yeshua also celebrated the feast, those feasts, on the lunar harvest calendar, and had ample time to refute or correct them. Yeshua fulfilled all the spring feast of Yehovah, that's God's holy name, Jehovah in English, on the lunar harvest calendar found in the Bible, and not a solar calendar ran by the Greek Romans or the desert sects. So Yeshua fulfilled all of them on this calendar to the day. He died on Passover, the Passover of the Creator's calendar. See, the festivals of Yehovah, the festivals of God, are memorials of what God has done or will do in the future. Jubilees chapter 6, 17, chapter 16, verse 21 to 30, chapter 32, chapter 34, they all speak of the significance to the feast as being prior to the events that made them significant, signifying pre-Exodus, making it special, making Adam do a feast, making all these other people doing feast prior to them even being told to do the feast, and also not having any connection or significance. This is something that rabbis will do. They will stick in information and they will stick in meaning behind things where they don't belong. You can't be moving God's feast around. God specifically gave it to us at Mount Sinai. He told us exactly how he wanted to do it. And we didn't do it until we came into the land of Israel. So this is something that contradicts the Bible. To give you an example, if you're an expert welder and you look at something that's been welded and you see imperfections, you see bad welding, it's obvious to the expert welder that it will not hold up. That is what we have come across when we examined the Book of Jubilees. We examine these imperfections and these issues that are very alarming to us. And that is why Project Truth Ministries wants to bring you this information. Now, at our next point, we will get into specific verses that are major red flags for the Book of Jubilees. You've made it this far. I appreciate you watching this. This concludes part 1. Please join us for part 2, where we go even deeper and we find some amazing things. We're going to see Noah's Ark. We're going to talk about the Tower of Babel. And we're going to look at some of the things that the Book of Jubilees adds to God's holy law. This will be a very important teaching for all those who don't know anything about it, because this book is gaining in popularity. So I appreciate you joining me. Thank you. God bless.